Hello and welcome to Running the Table, the podcast where we run through everything on the table in the world of sports. And another NCAA tournament is in the books. It's over. A national champion has been crowned. All hail the UConn Huskies, the new national champions of college basketball. But we have one more video to make before the season ends, and that is our NCAA tournament recap. Best of the bracket, where we take a chance to look back at the tournament that was some of the best matchups, some of the best storylines, and some of the teams that captured the hearts of some of us. But Tim, are you ready to go?
Let's run it. We had one hell of a bracket to cover.
Oh, yes, we do. And before that, let's go over how we finished. Since we picked the same national champion, Tim, you ended up one game ahead of me at 44-19. I ended at 43-20, which I think is pretty good considering this is one of the most unpredictable tournaments in recent memory.
For me to improve from last year with what I feel is arguably a much more confusing bracket, I'm particularly proud of that.
Yeah, and you should be, because this stuff is not easy. However, when you do a little bit of research and make some educated guesswork, it definitely does help.
Way.
One more thing, we did our Running the Table March Madness bracket challenge again, and the same guy that won it last year won it this year. Our very own Timothy Giannini has gone back to back, has defended his title.
If you look at stuff, if you pay attention to the little details and trust your gut, it really does help. You know, there's some method to my madness. This is not all just luck, but I will say, pretty crazy. You know, some of the stuff that I did end up picking that, you know, I in that was the bracket where I had Miami and UConn both in that Final Four, which was really, really cool. You obviously had a Final Four in one of your other brackets, which is crazy enough.
You can't help but laugh for a few reasons. The 2 years we've been doing this, Tim, you won it both years. We're gonna keep doing this.
Someone's got to dethrone me,
and hopefully next year somebody can dethrone you. I hope it's me. I honestly hope it's just anybody else, and then it's worth taking a look at the silver medal in our bracket pool, which was my bracket entitled Literal Chaos, which ended up being a 96th percentile bracket and tied for second with my actual bracket.
That alone just tells you what March Madness was like this year, that your chaos bracket could end up being 96th percentile.
Yeah, it had Rick Pitino and the Iona Gales as the national champion. And the reason it did so well is you mentioned I had the other half of the Final Four. You had the other half. I had San Diego State in the national championship game and FAU making the Final Four. So
no one could have predicted that other than the chaos.
Oh boy, like that is completely coincidental, which also proves that if you just pick at random, then somehow you can catch lightning in a bottle. But doing your research definitely does help. But on to the actual tournament, because we have so much. There's so much that happened. It's a lot, starting with Maryland to West Virginia in the first round. The tournament started out with a bang. Maryland squeaked out that close one. We talked about it, how West Virginia kind of shot themselves in the foot. It was their game to win. They didn't quite come up, but it was a very, very exciting way to start the tournament.
We all thought that West Virginia had that one. Maryland came out fighting, and they showed just enough to pull that out in the first round. So, you know, good for them. Obviously, the road didn't continue too long after that.
Furman and Virginia, did we see what we think we saw? Tim, you called that upset.
The
Paladins. They
what a way to end that game.
They stole the game from Tony Bennett.
Just take the timeout. Just take the timeout.
Just take the timeout. Nope. Inbound, the steal, pass to JP Pegas, and just a three and a dagger and heartbreak.
It's the March Classics.
That is a tough one. And it's another chapter in Virginia basketball where you're just not quite getting it done. Another game, Princeton and Arizona. That was a surefire Arizona win. And I put surefire in quotes because in this tournament, nothing was surefire. Arizona came out flat and they got punched in the mouth by an upstart Princeton team that absolutely earned it.
They did what they wanted to do. Princeton took control of that game, and they limited Arizona. Obviously, keeping Arizona to 55 points with the offensive efficiency they had throughout the year was very, very impressive. And they showed that they very much belonged in this tournament.
St. Mary's and VCU was another fun game. It was a 5-12 that was really intriguing.
That was scrappy.
Yeah, whoever took control of the pace took control of the game, and that's really a microcosm of the tournament itself. There was one first round game that you wanted to look at and say, okay, so how's this going going to, play out in the rest of the tournament. If you control the pace, you control the game. And when you control that pace, more often than not, you win the game.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously foul trouble from watching that game. Foul trouble was definitely an interesting thing to watch, and an injury to VCU's main guard was also difficult for them. But St. Mary's did what they wanted to do, and they ride by limiting you on offense with their tough defense. They did just enough on the offensive end to scrap it out and get a lead and keep the lead. More importantly,
we can't talk about the first round without discussing Fairleigh Dickinson and Purdue, the second ever 16-1 upset. We talked about it at length. We have a full video on this game, another agonizing chapter in Purdue basketball where for the third consecutive year, they find themselves on the wrong side of history. The regular season accolades for Purdue over the past 3 seasons is very impressive. 76 total wins, more than 2 months, ranked number 1 atop the AP poll. They've produced a top 5 NBA draft pick in Jaden Ivey, an AP National Player of the Year in Zach Edey, and they have, in the 3 years...
And a Wooden Award winless, or a Wooden Award winner. He swept
this many tournament wins. 2.
Yeah.
Which is as many as Fairleigh Dickinson had. That is...
And they both came in the same tournament.
I mean, not to twist the knife, but God, Purdue needs to fix something. But if you want to watch our video on Purdue and FDU, we have that. Go check it out if you haven't. FAU and Memphis was the final game of the first round, and that went down to the wire. It encapsulated FAU's
beginning of their road
perfectly. It was more on that later, but just the final shot, finding a way to get done, was absolutely awesome.
We knew what Memphis was capable of, and so did FAU, and they came into that game with a plan. And once again, it was another case of doing just enough to come out with a victory there, and that's what March is all about.
We had some very exciting second round games, starting with Penn State and Texas. It was an impressive run for Penn State, and they gave a very talented Texas team a battle. From where Penn State was starting off in the month of March, entering the Big Ten tournament, this was quite the run that they went on, from being the runner-up in the Big Ten tournament to winning a tournament game and almost making the Sweet 16. It's very impressive.
Yeah, they hit fire at the right time. Penn State, they had a bunch of their guys catch fire from 3. And in that Texas game, that was kind of just the case where they lost just enough of that fire. Obviously, they were still hitting a good amount of shots, and they limited Texas to 71. But they were a really, really impressive team. I loved their makeup. They played a very fun version of basketball, especially in the Big Ten. And I wish them all the best going forward. Sucks that they had to lose Coach Micah Shrewsbury.
A 1 seed upset that you predicted that happened in the second round. Arkansas defeated Kansas by 1 point. Arkansas just made one more play.
They were able to do.
And they upset the defending national champion, and Eric Musselman is waving his shirt around and celebrating a victory.
Yeah, we know how hard it is to go back to back, and obviously the Kansas was going to try their best. They had the talent to do it. We mentioned earlier as well, it really hurt for them to try to play that game without Bill Self, and you wonder how different that would have been. But they're a super talented team. You always know Kansas is going to be back year in and year out. But Arkansas, you got to give them credit that we knew they had the talent to do it, and they came to play that game. They took all of Kansas's best shots and took them the distance.
In the Sweet 16, Gonzaga and UCLA played an absolute classic. It was very reminiscent of the 21 matchup, with an ending that matched it, and Gonzaga ended up on the right side. Drew Timme was simply dominant, etched another chapter in his historic college career, and then Julian Strother just called game at the end with a dagger and a half. It was a very, very fun game in general. Now, some teams that made it to the Sweet 16, Princeton, the third straight 15 seed to make the Sweet 16. They were a fun, electric group that had absolutely nothing to lose, and they just rode their wave as long as they could with guys like Ryan Langborn and Matt Aloko. They just shocked the world. It was simple.
Yeah, it's like at this point, are we pretty much forced to predict a 15 into the Sweet 16 now? I mean, you talk about 3 years in a row, and before that, only one team, Florida Gulf Coast, ever doing that, making that feat. But I mean, Princeton showed that they really could play, and not only obviously that impressive first round performance against Arizona that we talked about, but their win against Mizzou, they looked comfortable, and they established their style of play. And losing to Creighton, is not a bad loss by any means, because we know that the talent that Creighton has So they're really, really fun. It's always fun to see what those Ivy League teams can do when they make their way in the NCAA tournament.
Houston season, the 1 seed there, ended at the hands of Miami in the Sweet 16. They had some bumps in the road. There were high expectations that weren't quite met. Obviously, the injury concerns with Marcus Sasser definitely affected them, but this was just a talented team that couldn't quite get it done. But what I think the big thing is going forward for Houston is next year they play in the Big 12, which only adds to the strength of that conference. We saw how good that conference was this year, and this conference realignment comes at the right time for Houston basketball. This is huge for that program in so many ways.
We've seen this, for a couple of years now with Houston, where it's like they have really, really talented teams, but there is something to be said about not necessarily being prepared against that same level of play throughout the season. Obviously, they dealt with a little bit of injury bugs here and there, with guys kind of going in and out of being fully healthy and whether or not they were kind of trying to play through injuries. But they had a super talented team, and I think they're going to tear up the Big 12. Obviously, you talk about the fact that add to such a powerful Big 12 already, but throwing them into mix makes the Big 12 that much more exciting, and it'll be interesting to see where they stack up against the rest of them next year.
Michigan State, they ran all the way to the Sweet 16 and was oh so close to going even further in that overtime thriller against Kansas State. January, February, Izzo, you know how the months go, and this ended up being a more complete team than we could have even imagined. They had all the makings to make a run with guys like Tyson Walker and Joey Hauser. They had the spotlight, but also AJ Hoggard, Jaden Akins, and even Matty Sissoko and Carson Cooper. They had their moments to shine. This is a very fun and talented Michigan State team, and it was really awesome to go to Columbus and watch them beat Marquette in the second round. That was a super interesting game, but it was a fun one, and it marked how Michigan State, you didn't need their best performance. They just needed enough, and they found a way to win.
Yeah, I mean, with Michigan State, what it comes down to is they continued to figure out who they were more and more as the season went on, and found out what they were comfortable with and what ways that they could establish themselves in a game to beat teams that you could consider to be more talented than them. Obviously, their guard play was incredible. Obviously, their shooting was their biggest strong point, and even when they didn't shoot the ball that well, they found ways to win with a coach like Tom Izzo. I mean, anything is possible. But it was a really fun group of guys to watch. Guys like Tyson Walker and Joey Hauser were absolute staples for them. It'll be really interesting to see, what this team looks like come next year.
Texas made it all the way to the Elite Eight, and they overcame and conquered so much over the course of the season. They had to grow up in a hurry. The maturity of this team, you knew they were in the makings for something special. I had them as my national champions because that was just a talented team that ran into Miami, a red hot Miami team, and it couldn't quite come together. But you have to give a round of applause to Rodney Terry and the way he handled that situation and the way the guys rallied and were able to not only win the Big 12 tournament, but win 3 games and make it to the Elite Eight in the tournament.
I don't think enough can be said about what Rodney Terry did to this team or did for this team. You talk about all the stuff that they went through throughout the year, but for him to, keep them afloat, obviously they had a very talented group, but they absolutely stormed through that Big 12 tournament, and they were playing absolute fantastic basketball. And you could say that for quite a bit of that Elite Eight game, you could say that they probably should have won that one too, and things, fell apart late. But really happy to see that Rodney Terry, he got what he deserved when it comes to, his contract and being signed on as a full-time coach, because he showed throughout this year that he very much deserved to lead that program going forward and turn it into his own. So I'm very excited to see what he's able to do that program under, his own control over these next couple of years.
Yeah, I think if he wasn't named the full-time head coach, there would have been a problem in Austin. So kudos to him.
Somebody wouldn't have been happy.
He earned the job. He absolutely
100%
earned the job. Creighton, they came up 1 possession short of the Final Four. They were a Final Four team. Their loss came at the hands of San Diego State. They just needed 1 more possession than they got. Yeah. With guys like Kalkbrenner and Baylor Shireman probably leaving, do we know if we're going to see the same Creighton team next year? It's up in the air. But what we got was really, really fun to watch. And at least for me in a school that goes to the Big East, to have almost two Big East schools in the Final Four.
Yeah.
It could have been special, but this is the dark side of March Madness. As we've recapped throughout this entire video, sometimes it's just not meant to be.
Yeah, somebody has to make history and somebody has to walk away disappointed. And, Creighton, I think, can still be very proud of what they put together this season. They had an incredible team, and we knew after their early exit last year just what type of talent that they were going to have this year with Kalkbrenner coming back off of the injury. And obviously they had some ups and downs throughout the season, but they started playing, once again, very good at the right time. And I think we can all agree that they were arguably the most talented sixth seed in this tournament. And they showed that when they stormed through teams like Baylor and a Princeton team that was playing very, very good up until that point. So yes, it'll be interesting to see what we see from them next year, but I think they'll still have quite a bit of talent. But losing, guys at the top there like Kalkbrenner and Shireman, I mean, it does always take a hit to your team.
Another team that is very proud of themselves, Kansas State, the resurgence of their program, to have another high-profile basketball program in the state of Kansas is going to make the next few years very, very fun. But we said it all tournament, Kansas State just went and did the damn tang. They revived the program.
Another coach that I think doesn't get enough props.
He deserves so much love for the job that he did in his first year with guys like Marquise Noel, Keontae Johnson. What he went through to get to that point is absolutely incredible. That entire team, the run was incredibly fun to watch. It just sucks that it ended at the hands of FAU. I think in that matchup, regardless of who would have went to the Final Four, I think America would have been fine with it.
Absolutely. That was one of the most fun matchups to watch, to send somebody to the Final Four. And I think they as a team are the most fun story, but especially guys like Keontae Johnson. I think he by and far is the best story in all of college basketball from this year, what he went through to get to this point. And I think they were probably the easiest team to root for if you weren't a fan of Kansas State, because of the guys they had, the coach in Jerome Tang. Marquise Noel obviously was super, super fun to watch, and Keontae Johnson with his story. So we'll see what they're able to keep going in the future, but I'm really looking forward to keeping an eye on that Kansas versus Kansas State rivalry in the upcoming years.
Well, Tim, it was really easy for me to root for Kansas State because I keep beating that dead horse. At the beginning of the season, when Kansas State traveled to Butler, ended up victorious.
Once, you heard it 1,000 times.
Hey, we beat not one, but two teams that made it to the Elite Eight, because we also captured a win against Xavier. So it's almost like Butler was there too.
It's almost like Butler didn't do anything else for the whole season.
Our basketball program is in shambles. Give us a break, man. Let's talk about the programs that actually did some stuff in this tournament, such as Miami. My Miami Hurricanes. I thought last year was a fun year. That's when you think they can't take another
step up.
They went one step further and they made their first Final Four. And the one thing that you can say about the Canes is that it was not easy from start to finish. Every single step of the road was difficult for them. From the first round, when you look and they're down late in the game against Drake, you think, is this run going to be over here? You conquer them. You beat Trace Jackson Davis in Indiana by a significant margin. You beat Marcus Sasser in Houston by a significant margin. You beat that Texas team with a absolute comeback in the Elite Eight. And then you just run smack dab into UConn, although they did have a little bit of a run in the second half, which gave you a slight bit of hope. But nonetheless, Miami is a legit basketball program now. I think over the past 2 years, they've definitely established themselves as such. And for as long as Coach L stays there, I think that's going to be a pretty popular spot. And Miami basketball might be a basketball school now. Ended up third in the AP coaches poll. So no complaints for me.
It's hard to figure out where they'll go from this point, but looking at their tournament run, and obviously we knew just how good they could be.
They're taking one more step. National championship game next year, which means
one step per year, and eventually 2025.
The 2025 national champion Miami Hurricanes. It didn't quite come like I said, and you can clip it. Miami Hurricanes 2023 national champions. Book it. but there
Yes.
is room for growth, believe it or not. We just need to keep the boys together and run it back one more time. And in March, anything can happen. And they're not the
Absolutely.
only team in the state of Florida to make a magical run, because we have to talk about
The
FAU.
boys.
What a run. What a ride. From 0 wins in the NCAA tournament entering this year to the Final Four. Who
Yeah.
cares that yeah, the heartbreaker against San Diego State was painful, but could you really have asked for much more if you're an FAU fan? No. No, this was everything that you
Just
could
to
have
watch
imagined
them
and
get
then
there
some.
was absolutely incredible.
Absolutely. And they overcame some pretty tough games in their own right. We covered the first round game against Memphis. You beat Fairleigh Dickinson, which wasn't easy. You get by Tennessee's defense. You get by Kansas State, and you're about one Lamont Butler step back away from playing UConn and getting crushed in the national championship game. Because
Yeah.
let's be real, it would have been a nice story. FAU was not going to beat UConn. Nobody was going to beat UConn.
Not
More
with the way
on
that they
that
were playing.
later. This is about FAU and celebrating what a hell of a ride they had. And I think the scary thing is, Tim, I don't
They're
know
back.
if they're going anywhere.
They're
They
back. They're all
bring
back.
back everybody.
Mm-hmm.
They're all back. So
What
we'll
you
see
of
how
course have to
sustainable
look
this
at though,
is.
exactly, it's the sustainability, because obviously there were some backdoor reasons. You don't want to compare them to a program like North Carolina, but you can
Ah,
bring everybody back and still have things not necessarily be the same. So they got to keep that fire, they got to keep that chip on their shoulder, and prove that they very
I
much still belong there.
I don't think FAU is going to be quite North Carolina
Oh, and I'm
unless
not saying they will be. I'm just saying, you always have to
unless
question that motivation.
unless one star teammate steals another star teammate's girlfriend in a Mr. Steal Your Girl situation that
Something
UNC
tells me
had.
that FAU might not have that problem,
Dude, in
but
Boca, anything can happen. I'm sure some crazy stuff goes down in Boca. I don't know. I've never been. I'd like to go.
hey,
I hear it's a good time.
five wide happens. That's what happens.
Oh
Five
dear.
wide out of bounds.
Ready, set, hit. Now we're on to San Diego State, who made it all the way to the national championship game. They
I don't know about
rode their
you. I
defense.
never saw this coming.
No,
They were one
no,
of
at least
my
not.
favorite picks to be very, very uncomfortable with and drop either the first or second game. And they proved me entirely wrong every step of the way.
I thought their ceiling was a Sweet 16 berth running into Bama, but Bama was no problem. And then they ran by Creighton, and then they got by FAU, and they
You
cut
talk
the
about
lead to
two back
6
to
against
back one.
UConn.
You talk about back to back 1 point wins to take themselves to the national championship. Like, you're cutting it close, but once again, all it takes is being ahead at the end.
Who
That's
cares
all
when
that
the
matters.
who cares when the
When the
stars
last
align
buzzer
the way they
sounds,
did? The national championship, UConn and San Diego State, that was a fun game, even if the score wasn't as close as other national
no,
championship games were. It didn't quite come down to the other buzzer beater, but with the way UConn was playing, it was pretty much how they had the whole tournament, where UConn would they'd be playing close, UConn would go on a run. Then the San Diego State chipped back in, and you thought it was going to be
yep,
close, and then UConn just left them in the dust. I mean, with 7.5 minutes to go, UConn's lead was only 6 points.
yeah, they cut it down.
When earlier in the first half, UConn led by as much as 16. So San Diego State, you have to give props to them for sticking in and not giving up and keeping the fight on.
Absolutely.
But who was going to stop this UConn team?
Once again, you have to give the props to UConn for putting the brakes on that run as well, because you've seen it happen before. Obviously, with FAU's big lead on San Diego State in that Final Four matchup, and they came storming back. But UConn settled down. They got back to doing what they did, and they just simply had too many options, and they got too comfortable in their offensive sets. And San Diego State just couldn't quite keep up. Obviously, guys like Adama Sanogo were absolutely incredible for him. And even guys like Jordan Hawkins, even if he wasn't being a world beater, just being enough for them to have a balanced offense. That was going to be the key to beating a really solid defense like San Diego State. They kept them on their heels the whole time, and obviously, a 16-point win obviously looks really, really comfortable, but they truly earned that.
Yes, they did. It reminds me of how they beat Miami, where they established a big lead going into the half, and then Miami chipped back in,
from the
and
rest of the
UConn
way, they
just
just weathered the storm.
slammed the door.
Yeah, weather the storm.
Yeah. And let's just talk about that dominance of UConn. It was one of the most dominant national championship runs ever. The average margin of victory of a flat 20 points was the fourth largest ever. And with that, you mentioned Adama Sanogo. The thing about UConn and their national championship runs, this is number 5 for them. In 2011, it was the Kemba Walker run. In 2014, it was the Shabazz Napier run. That's a name that you probably haven't heard in a long, long time.
Yeah.
But 2023 was the Adama Sanogo run while observing Ramadan, no less. Tim, I know you shouted the 3 UConn players out while fasting really and being dominant. It's that much more impressive, and it's
Adama Sanogo said he said he felt almost a little bit better playing while fasting because he felt a little bit lighter. Faster, a little bit lighter. Yeah, there's something he said about it, but
whatever works.
He's a whole different beast. Mm-hmm. He looked dominant against whoever he came up against. And let's just say there's something that UConn likes about coming out of the West. Because if I'm not mistaken, now 3 of their 5 national championships, or 4 out of the 5, I believe it's 3 out of the 5, have come with them winning while being the winners of the West region. So, hey, if you see what UConn in that West region, you might want to make a bracket for him just because.
Yeah. This 2023 run, there are also comparisons being made to the 2011 run, which I wonder who they beat then. I don't know.
Let's just say that one was a low scoring national championship. That did not look nearly as fun as this one was for us.
Yeah. We also didn't do running the table in 2011. We were in elementary school, but
not quite at this point yet.
No, that's not here nor there. Regardless, we've had a ton of fun covering the entire tournament. We did the exact same thing last year, did it again this year, and with any luck, we're going to be right back here next year. College basketball
I hope so.
is always a fun time. Thank you to all of you who have liked, commented, subscribed along the way. Your support means the world, and it's one of the main reasons why we do what we do. We love doing this stuff because we enjoy talking sports on this platform, but we also enjoy making content for you guys, the fans, and that's what it's really all about. Because at the end of the day, we're just 2 guys talking college basketball. We're not experts by any means. We don't claim to be. We're just here.
We're getting better.
We're getting better. We're getting better.
We are.
But we're at the end of the day, we're just here to have a good time and talk college basketball.
Absolutely.
But Tim, do we have anything else about this year's tournament?
It was super, super fun to watch. Obviously, I at least for one knew. I think we all knew just how crazy this March Madness could be. And it certainly lived up to the hype with all the parity between teams. Obviously, all credits to UConn, and there were so many fun games. There were so many banger games in almost every single round. There was some great basketball to watch, and to me, that's what March Madness is all about.
There's no doubt. When doing a tournament recap, when we're trying to pick the best moments of the tournament, it gets a little difficult because you want to talk about.
You can't talk about it all.
There's so much stuff to talk about, and
so many great teams, so many great runs.
But it's impossible to cover almost everything in a tournament as big, as wild as March Madness. This was March. We're going to turn the page to the next sports we have coming up: Major League Baseball, the NBA, maybe NHL. Who knows? If you want it, leave a comment. We can bring it for you. But until then, if you haven't seen our tournament predictions and the rest of the college basketball content that we brought to you this season, because we brought a lot of it, go check it out. Go check out our other stuff on the channel. And if you want more from us, like and subscribe. And until next time, we out.
Jeez, what in the
my God.
Is that? It's just sticking straight up like a top hat.
One thing, our hair is a lot longer this year than it was last year.
Something like that.